Random House Audio presents The Fire by Katherine Neville, read for you by Susan Denaker. In the year AD 782, the Emperor Charlemagne received a fabulous gift from Ibn al-Arabi, the Moorish governor of Barcelona, a gold and silver bejeweled chess set that today we know as the Montglane Service. The service was rumored to contain a secret of dark, mysterious power. All those obsessed with power were determined to obtain the pieces. In order to prevent this, the Montglane Service was buried for nearly 1,000 years. In 1790, at the dawn of the French Revolution, the chess set was exhumed from its hiding place, Montglane Abbey in the Basque Pyrenees, and the pieces were scattered across the globe. This move launched a new round in a deadly game, a game that threatens, even today, to light the match that will set the world aflame. Zagorsk Monastery, Russia, Autumn 1993. Solarin gripped his little daughter's mittened hand firmly in his own. He could hear the snow crunch beneath his boots and see their breath rise in silvery puffs as together they crossed the impregnable walled park of Zagorsk. Why had he brought her here to Russia, a land that held so many bitter memories from his past? When he was just a child himself, when Stalin had reigned, hadn't he witnessed the destruction of his own family in the dead of night? He'd survived the cruel disciplines of the orphanage where he'd been left in the Republic of Georgia and those long, bleak years at the Palace of Young Pioneers, only because they'd learned how very well the young boy, Alexandra Solarin, could play chess. Kat had begged him not to risk coming here, not to risk bringing their child here. But his wife's biggest fear had always been not of Russia, but of the game that had cost them both so much. The game that, more than once, had nearly destroyed their life together. Solarin was here for a game of chess, a critical game, the last game of the week-long competition. Zagorsk was the oldest of the Lavras, or exalted monasteries, forming a ring of fortress monasteries that had defended Moscow for 600 years. Guards were stationed every few yards along the high parapets and the interior perimeter of the wall. Solarin glanced down at his daughter, Alexandra, little Z, her small hand still grasping his. She smiled up at him, her green eyes filled with confidence, and his heart nearly broke with the beauty of her. How could he and Kat have created such a creature? Chess was everything to his daughter, and he knew this would surely be the most important tournament of Z's young life. In the week, she'd lost only one game. She must win today, for this was the game that could make Alexandra Z. Solarin, who was not yet 12, the youngest Grand Master of chess, male or female, in the history of the game. Z tugged her father's hand. "Don't worry, Papa. I'll beat him this time." The one she referred to was Vartan Azov, the young chess wizard from Ukraine, only a year older than Z and the only player in the tournament so far to have defeated her. Against young Azov she had played the King's Indian Defense, one of her favorites, Solarin knew. But it wasn't to be. There was a name for it. Amaurosis skakistika, chess blindness. Every player had experienced it at one time in his career, the failure to spot a truly obvious danger. In all the games Z had ever played, it had happened to her only once. It could not happen again today. Solarin glimpsed the facade of the art museum and just beyond, the vestry and treasury where they were headed for the game. The museum's facade had been festooned with a large, colorful banner displaying a painting and hand-printed words that announced, in Cyrillic and English, 75 years of Soviet Palek art. Palek art were those lacquered paintings that often depicted scenes from fairy tales and other peasant themes. They'd long been the only primitive or superstitious art acceptable to the communist regime, and they adorned everything in Russia, from miniature papier-mâché boxes to the walls of the pioneer's palace itself, where Solarin, with 50 other boys, had practiced his defenses and counterattacks for more than 12 years. The painting on this banner was a rendering of the most famous Russian fairy tale, the story of the Firebird. There were many versions that had inspired great art, literature, and music, from Pushkin to Stravinsky. This picture on the banner was the scene where Prince Ivan, hiding in his father the Tsar's gardens all night, finally sights the luminous bird that had been eating his father's golden apples, and he tries to capture her. The Firebird escapes, leaving just one of her fabulous magical feathers in Ivan's grasp. As Solarin and Z curved back to head toward the vestry, a stooped old woman in a babushka and threadbare sweater and carrying a tin pail brushed past them. She bumped into Z, bowed an apology, and continued across the yard. When she'd passed, Solarin felt Z tugging his hand. He glanced down to see his daughter extracting a small embossed cardboard placard from her pocket, a ticket or pass to the Pollock exhibit, for it bore the same picture as the banner. "Where did this come from?" he asked.
"That lady put it into my pocket," Z was saying.
When he looked down again, his daughter had flipped over the card, and Solarin snatched it away. On the back was pasted a small illustration of a flying bird set inside an Islamic 8-pointed star, and 3 words were printed in Russian. He glanced quickly in the direction the old woman had gone, but she seemed to have vanished. Then he saw something flicker at the far periphery of the walled fortress, emerging from the copse of trees. She was vanishing again around the far corner of the Tsar's chambers. Just before she disappeared, she turned to glance over her shoulder directly at Solarin, and he, who had been about to follow her, halted in shock. It was a face he knew, a face he had imagined he would never see again in this life. Then she was gone.
"Do you know that lady, Papa?"
Z asked.
"For a moment she looked familiar," he said to Z, "but I'm sure I do not."
"And what does her card say?"
"Apashna. It means danger,"
Solarin told her, trying to pull himself together.
"What do the other words say?" she asked.
Solarin paused and looked at her.
"In English it means, beware the fire."
He took a deep breath.
"Now let's go inside," he said, "so you can beat the pants off that Ukrainian patzer."
From the moment they entered the vestry of Sergei of Lavra, Solarin knew something was wrong. He thought of the woman's message. What did it mean? Taras Petrosian, the dashing nouveau capitalist tournament organizer, in his expensive Italian suit, was handing a large wad of rubles as a pourboire to a skinny monk with a big ring of keys who'd unlocked the building for the game. Petrosian, it was said, had made his fortune through under-the-table dealings in the several designer restaurants and nightclubs he owned. There was a colloquial word for it in Russian: blat, connections. The armed thugs had already penetrated the inner sanctum. They lurked everywhere in the vestry, leaning conspicuously against the walls, and not just for warmth. Among other things, this low, squat, unobtrusive building served as the monastery's treasury. The glut of the medieval church's gold and jewels were displayed on pedestals in brightly lit glass cases scattered around the floor. It would be hard to concentrate on chess, thought Solarin, with all this blinding glitter. And then he saw it. In a glass display case far across the room. Solarin walked as in a dream across the wide open floor of the vestry, and he stood looking down at the large glass case. Within was a sculpture he had also thought he would never see again. It was a heavy gold carving, caked with jewels. It portrayed a figure dressed in long robes and seated in a small pavilion with the draperies drawn back. The Black Queen, whispered a voice just beside him.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?